Laura was a lonely teacher who never imagined being fired for her kindness. But this seemingly unfortunate event would lead her to meet both her guardian angel and the love of her life. Laura was an elementary school teacher in a small town, a warm, kind-hearted person whose life hadn't always been kind to her in return. Escaping a chaotic family life, she had jumped at the first job opportunity after finishing her university degree, settling into this small town and quickly adapting to its quiet charm. Her neighbors were wonderful people and she adored her students. Despite the modesty of her life, Laura was content. But deep inside, she carried a persistent sense of emptiness. Growing up without stable parental figures had left her with a lingering feeling of loneliness that even the tight-knit community couldn't fully erase. Laura had always faced life's challenges on her own. While she valued her independence, there were nights when the solitude felt like a heavy weight pressing on her chest. What could the future hold for someone like Laura, who had so much love to give but no one to receive it? Laura prepared for her first lesson of the day, her heart swelling with warmth as she looked out at her students. Today, however, there was a new addition to her class, and she was eager to make him feel welcome. As the students settled into their seats, Laura immediately noticed Nicholas, a sweet-looking, slightly shy boy sitting quietly in the back row with his bag clutched tightly on his lap. Smiling warmly, she walked over to him. "Hi, Nicholas," she said softly, kneeling slightly to meet his eyes. "I'm Ms. Laura. I'm so happy you're here with us today. How's your first day so far?" Nicholas glanced up briefly, his big brown eyes filled with hesitation. "It's okay," he said in a small voice. "Well, we're all really excited to have you join us," Laura said encouragingly. "Don't worry, we'll make sure you feel right at home here. Everyone, we have a new friend joining us today. This is Nicholas," Laura announced with a smile. "Nicholas just moved here from the city because of his family's work. Let's all make sure he feels welcome, okay?" The students greeted him enthusiastically, and Nicholas gave a shy wave before returning to his seat. Laura noticed how he seemed to relax just a little after that. It was a snowy day with the first snowfall of the year blanketing the schoolyard in white. When the recess bell rang, the children eagerly dashed outside, laughing and playing in the snow. But Nicholas stayed behind, quietly observing the others through the window. Laura approached him a few times, gently encouraging him to join the other kids, but Nicholas politely declined, looking visibly uncomfortable with the suggestion. Respecting his boundaries, Laura let him be, though she couldn't help but wonder what was on his mind. That afternoon, the class was scheduled to have a visit from a child psychologist who would teach them some fun and educational activities. Laura, however, left school early, trusting the staff to handle the session. At home, her cozy little house was a welcome retreat from the cold. She lit a fire in her small fireplace, brewed herself a cup of coffee, and sat by the window watching the snow fall gently outside. Soon, the warmth of the room and the gentle snowfall lulled her into a short nap. When she awoke, Laura prepared herself a simple dinner. A single plate, a single glass, just enough for one. She sat on her small couch, her favorite show playing in the background as she ate. Despite the comfort of her evening routine, there was an undeniable weight that came with being alone. Laura didn't like to acknowledge it even to herself, but nights like these reminded her of how much she longed for companionship, someone to share these quiet moments with, someone to lean on when the world felt heavy. Laura was in her classroom early the next morning, carefully organizing her lesson materials. She loved the quiet of the school before the students arrived. It gave her a sense of peace and focus. Through the window, she could see the children arriving, bundled up in colorful, cheerful winter jackets. Her gaze shifted and she noticed Nicholas. Unlike the other children who were wrapped warmly in vibrant coats, Nicholas was wearing a large, old-fashioned brown velvet jacket that didn't look warm enough. It hung awkwardly on him, far too big for his small frame. Laura immediately understood why Nicholas might not want to go outside. He was likely self-conscious about his coat. She hadn't yet met Nicholas's parents and didn't know much about their situation. But seeing this stirred a sense of concern and determination in her. Before the first lesson began, she decided to visit the school principal to inquire about Nicholas's family. If you're enjoying this heartwarming story, make sure to subscribe for more inspiring tales like this. The principal, a brusque and impatient woman, barely looked up from her paperwork when Laura entered. "Just some regular folks," she said dismissively when Laura asked about Nicholas's family. "They're new in town. That's all I know." Laura pressed further, asking for their contact information. The principal sighed loudly, clearly annoyed, and handed Laura a slip of paper. "I hope you're not meddling in their business," she added sharply. Ignoring the remark, Laura took the paper and left. After school ended, she called Nicholas's father, introducing herself as his son's teacher. "What's the problem? Did he do something wrong at school?" The man barked, his tone sharp and defensive. For a moment, Laura was transported back to her own childhood, recalling the cold, harsh voice of her father. Steadying herself, she replied gently, "Oh no, not at all. I just wanted to introduce myself and talk about how Nicholas is settling in. We just moved. We're very busy," the father said curtly. "Maybe his mom can stop by tomorrow if she has time." And with that, he abruptly hung up the phone. Laura's heart ached. The interaction felt all too familiar, parents who seemed to see their child as a problem, rather than someone in need of support. Still, she didn't want to jump to conclusions. She resolved to meet Nicholas's mother and learn more. The next day, as school was winding down, a timid woman entered the classroom. Laura immediately recognized her as Nicholas's mother. "Hi, you must be Mrs. Carter," Laura said warmly, extending her hand. The woman nodded nervously, shaking Laura's hand with a soft grip. "Yes, I'm Nicholas's mom. I hope he hasn't been any trouble." "Oh, not at all. He's a wonderful boy," Laura reassured her. They chatted for a while, and Laura quickly realized that Nicholas's mother was far softer and more approachable than his father. From their conversation, Laura learned that the family's recent move had been difficult. Nicholas's father had left a job he'd held for years, and the financial strain had been immense. The stress had only made his already stern personality harder to bear. Understanding the challenges the family was facing, Laura carefully chose her words. Just as she was about to speak, there was a gentle knock on the classroom door. "Yes?" Laura called. A man in his 30s, with neatly combed brown hair and a kind expression, poked his head in. "Sorry to interrupt," he said politely. "I see you're with someone. I'll wait until you're free." Laura nodded, appreciating his courtesy. She turned back to Nicholas's mother, offering some kind, encouraging words before thanking her for coming. As Nicholas's mother got up to leave, Laura hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Mrs. Carter, I hope you don't take this the wrong way," she began gently, "but I've noticed that Nicholas might not have a warm enough coat for the winter. Would it be okay if I gifted him one? I'd love to help in any way I can." Tears welled up in Mrs. Carter's eyes. "You're very kind," she said, her voice trembling. "We're lucky to have you as his teacher." She thanked Laura again and left, wiping her tears as she walked out the door. The man at the door entered as soon as Mrs. Carter had gone. "Hi, I'm David," he said, offering Laura a warm smile. "I'm sorry for barging in earlier. I've been trying to catch you, but you left early yesterday." Laura gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Please have a seat," she said, curious about what had brought him to her classroom. David was a businessman who had grown up in this small town and attended the very school Laura now taught at. After achieving remarkable success elsewhere, he had returned to his hometown with grand plans and a vision for its future. His enthusiasm was infectious, and as he spoke about his ideas, his eyes sparkled with passion. He was also undeniably handsome, which Laura couldn't help but notice. Though she tried to stay focused on his words, her mind occasionally wandered. She was captivated by the kindness behind his intentions. He smiled warmly and continued, "I'll be in town for quite a while and I wanted to introduce myself. But I also need a small favor from you." Laura raised an eyebrow, curious. "You're a teacher here, so I'm sure you're aware of the school's needs and the students' necessities," David said. Laura silently admired his thoughtfulness as he went on. "I'd like you to prepare a list of everything the school needs, supplies, resources, whatever you think is important. Don't hold back. I'd like to donate and give back to this school because much of what I've achieved today started right here in this very place," he added. Laura was deeply moved by his generosity and told him so. "That's incredibly kind of you, David. I can't tell you how much the school could benefit from this." David nodded modestly, clearly appreciating her words. "Thank you," he said. As their conversation wrapped up, David stood and extended his hand. Laura shook it, and for a moment, it felt as if time had stopped just for them. Their eyes locked and a flutter of excitement coursed through them both. Neither said a word, but the unspoken connection lingered. Trying to keep things casual, they each murmured a soft, "See you soon," as David turned to leave. But as he walked out, his foot caught on the leg of a chair, causing him to stumble slightly. He quickly regained his composure, flashing an embarrassed smile. "Good evening," he called out again as he exited the classroom. Once he was out of earshot, he muttered to himself, "Ah, stupid me." His cheeks flushed as he shook his head, embarrassed by his clumsiness. Laura bought a warm coat for Nicholas before heading home, her heart full of hope for the little boy. The next day she gave him the coat, telling him it was a gift from the town council to avoid embarrassing him. Nicholas was surprised but grateful, and he hugged Laura shyly. That afternoon, as Laura finalized the school supply list David had requested, she glanced out the window and saw Nicholas laughing and playing in the snow with his classmates, his new coat keeping him warm. It was a heartwarming moment. But her relief was shattered when Nicholas's father arrived at the school later that day. Laura saw him enter the schoolyard and approached Nicholas briefly before heading inside. Moments later she was called to the principal's office, where the man was shouting, "We don't need anyone's pity." Laura tried to explain that her intentions were only to help, but the man grew angrier. The principal, visibly frustrated, finally intervened. "I told you not to interfere in personal matters," she snapped. "You're fired." Laura was left stunned, her kind gesture ending in heartbreak. Laura couldn't believe she had been fired. With tears streaming down her face, she hurried out of the principal's office and back toward her classroom. All she had done was try to help. Her gaze was fixed on the floor as she walked, her pace quick and unsteady. Suddenly she collided with someone. "I'm so sorry," she began, but then she looked up and locked eyes with David. His warm smile vanished the moment he saw her tears. "What happened?" he asked urgently. I got fired," Laura whispered, her voice cracking. Embarrassed, she pulled away from his supportive arms and rushed into her classroom. David stood there for a moment, puzzled, then turned and headed straight to the principal's office. Inside, the principal was still trying to calm down Nicholas's father, who was fuming with anger. When David walked in, the principal's demeanor shifted immediately. David, this isn't a great time," she started nervously. "I can see that," David said sharply. "But I need to know what's going on." Nicholas's father began repeating the same complaints in a frustrated tone, while the principal looked visibly uncomfortable. David quickly pieced the situation together. Turning to Nicholas's father, he spoke calmly, "I understand how you're feeling and you're right to care deeply about your son." The man, surprised by David's composed response, softened slightly and began explaining his stress and struggles. David listened intently, seeing not just anger but a father overwhelmed by life's challenges. "I know it's not easy," David said gently, "but you need to see the good intentions behind this. No one meant to hurt or embarrass you." Nicholas's father sighed, his voice quieter now. "I didn't want her to lose her job," he admitted. David turned to the principal. "Is firing a dedicated teacher your idea of solving problems like this?" he asked, his tone firm. The principal was stunned, struggling to respond. "I expected better from you," David added. "Frankly, I'm reconsidering my donation." "No, wait," the principal stammered. "It was just the heat of the moment. David cut her off. "Laura will keep her job." End of discussion. "Of course," the principal agreed hastily. "It was just a misunderstanding," she trailed off. Nicholas's father looked at David, a mix of surprise and gratitude on his face. David turned to him and said, "Life puts us in tough situations sometimes. You've just moved here and I grew up in this town. Around here we help each other." Reaching into his pocket, David handed the man his business card. "Whatever work you do, I'm sure I can find a position for you at my new facility. You strike me as someone loyal and hardworking. Give me a call and remember, you're not alone in this." Nicholas's father nodded, calmer now. David patted his shoulder before heading to Laura's classroom, with Nicholas's father following behind. Inside, Nicholas's father apologized to Laura, his voice full of regret. "I'm sorry for how I acted," he said. "I was overwhelmed, but that's no excuse. You were just trying to help my son." Laura, still in shock, nodded. She couldn't believe this was the same man who had been shouting moments ago. David stepped forward, his tone gentle. "You're keeping your job, Laura. This is where you belong, and I don't want you feeling bad about doing what's right." Laura's eyes welled up again, emotions swirling inside her. David hesitated for a moment, then instinctively reached out and wiped a tear from her cheek. Laura froze, her heart racing. "I know the timing's awful," David said, his voice soft and hesitant, "but would you like to have dinner with me? I'd really like to get to know you better. Coming back here after so many years, it'd be nice to have someone to talk to." Laura nodded, unable to find her voice. As they left the school, she saw Nicholas and his father embracing in the snowy yard. The sight warmed her heart. That evening, Laura and David shared a wonderful dinner, talking as if they'd known each other forever. While a new romance blossomed, two lonely hearts began to heal. If this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more unforgettable moments.